Jeffrey Horowitz is the artistic director of Theater for New Audience, which he founded in 1979. In those 3 decades, they have produced over 60 major works for Broadway and off-Broadway. In 2001, Theater for New Audience became the first American theater invited to bring a production of Shakespeare to England. Jeffrey is on the panel of the New York State Council on the Arts and on the board of directors of Theater Communications Group. He's on the advisory board of the Shakespeare Society and London's Globe Theatre. I'm delighted Jeffrey is here today to chat with us about Italy's influence on theater. Jeffrey, it's such a delight having you here.
It's great to be here.
So let's start with Shakespeare and his love of Italy. You're going to be doing Two Gentlemen of Verona in the spring. Yep. Tell me your sense of why Shakespeare had Italy as a setting for so many of his plays.
He had a fascination with Italian characters and actually the cities themselves. If you look in, for example, Romeo and Juliet, the sycamore trees that are referred to in that play are actually there. Whether he or someone he spoke to, whether he saw drawings, he actually related specifically to that culture. He set many of his many plays there. I mean, Othello, Merchant of Venice, All's Well That Ends Well, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Romeo and Juliet.
It's amazing that Shakespeare did so many of his plays.
Well, and again, there are books about the fact that, Shakespeare, the Shakespeare who lived in Stratford could never have authored these plays because the Shakespeare who wrote those 12 plays had to have gone to Italy. Because you can go, and I say you can go, and you can take Romeo and Juliet, you can walk around that city, and you can find the things in the city. You can actually find them today. So, well, how could Shakespeare have done that, is the argument. Therefore, he couldn't have been Shakespeare because he didn't travel in Italy.
Let's move on from Shakespeare to, you've traveled to Italy. Tell me a little of a trip that stands out.
Well, my first introduction to Italy was when I didn't travel. I was growing up in Miami Beach. And Miami Beach was mostly Jewish. And there happened to be one Catholic church near our house. And I would say to my parents, "What is that?" And they would say, "Well, that's a Catholic church." And I would say, "Well, what is a Catholic church?" And they said, "Well, that's another religion, but Catholics don't like Jews." "Well, what's it doing there then?" "Here in this town." They said, "Well, they're the outsiders here." I said, "Well, where do Catholics come from?" So, they come from the Pope. I said, "Really? And where is that?" He said, "Italy." So actually, my first introduction to Italy was this, or Italians, was this Catholic church in Miami Beach.
Have you had theater experiences?
Yeah, I had theater experience. I have done theater in Italy. So one of the artists I wanted to work with, who prides himself in being an Italian-American with roots in Italy, is John Turturro. And John Turturro lives in Brooklyn and has a wife who's a very fine actress, Francin Segan. And we got to know one another, and I asked John, "Well, what would you work with us?" And both of you, and it turned out that Catherine couldn't, but John did, and he suggested a playwright, Edoardo Di Filippo. And Edoardo Di Filippo is Neapolitan and is one of the great playwrights of the 20th century. I hadn't known Di Filippo. So John wanted to do a play by Di Filippo that had never been done in America. We did it. How you actually translated this play is very interesting because when you go to translate Di Filippo wrote Neapolitan. And a lot of the dialect and finding the equivalents, it wasn't anything like you heard, for example, in The Sopranos. It wasn't that kind of Italian. And it was a very, very interesting play. And we did it, and it went well. And then we got a phone call. The Teatro Mercadante from Naples had heard about this. They wanted to bring Theater for New Audience's production with John the first time Di Filippo had been done in English in Naples. Now, when you walk down the streets of Naples, I discovered, and you said, oh, we're here doing a Di Filippo play, people can quote Di Filippo.
We've got to go travel in Italy together and see theater.
Okay, I'm there.
I'll take you.
Okay.
In Tuscany. I know a place.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much,
Great.
Jeffrey.
Thank you.
It was a
Thanks a lot.
pleasure.
It's a great pleasure.